Welcome back, everyone. Welcome to this episode of the vIQtory podcast. I am your host, Steve McGrath, alongside, as always, Mr. Chris Haddad. And today, we're incredibly fortunate because we have another star-studded guest, someone whose football resume is second to none, Mr. Jon Jansen. Now, Jon, well, first of all, thank you so much for taking the time to come with us today.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Now, for those of you who may not be familiar with Jon, who, if you couldn't see on that eminent shirt, bleeds blue and maize like no other, let's take it back a few steps. Jon was a three-sport athlete in high school. From there, went to the University of Michigan, where 1997, 1998 was a captain on both teams, which means, yes, he did win a national title under Coach Lode Carr, was an All-American the following year in 98. From there, gets drafted 37th overall in the 1999 draft to the Washington Redskins, where he spent a decade. Has an 11-year career, with that last year coming in Detroit. Looking in hindsight, he's named one of the 80 greatest Redskins of all time. Just last year in 2017, entered the State of Michigan Sports Hall of Fame. And Jon now has his own podcast, In the Trenches, where it's focused on Michigan football, and he does the pre- and post-game. So, Jon, as if the resume didn't speak for itself, I mean, no one is doing as much as you are.
Well, I love the game of football, and I love the University of Michigan. So it's for me, when I retired from football, my kids were in an age where, if you're a football coach, when you just don't get to be a dad as much as I wanted to be, and so radio and TV was kind of where I got to stay involved in football. And I've been doing the Michigan games now going on 5 years. I'm on staff here in the athletic department. And it's, my podcasts, we're in the infant stages. We've come out with about that tomorrow, Wednesday will be the third episode that we've had. And it's been a lot of fun because I get to talk football. I get to talk Michigan football. I get to be around the guys here in the team. And it's an exciting time for me.
And Jon, I listened to the first podcast earlier today. So for all of our listeners out there, if you want insights from the players themselves, the coaches themselves, this is where you need to go, because it doesn't get any better than firsthand information. And that's sort of, the first question that I want to have for you is, obviously, you're a huge part of the Michigan program now, but let's go back to when you're 18 years old. You are looking to do something for your college. So how ultimately do you decide on Michigan? What was that recruiting process like for you, and how did you ultimately come to that decision?
For me, it was simple. When I became a sophomore, junior in high school, and I was recruited earlier for basketball because that's just kind of how the sport works. I thought really all I wanted to do was to be able to get a scholarship so I could pay for my education. Everybody has dreams of being a pro football player, pro basketball player, but for a while, those are what they are, their dreams. And I wanted to make sure that I had an opportunity to go to school, get an education, and be able to provide for my family moving forward. And when I was being recruited for football, there was, I had Wisconsin and Michigan State and Notre Dame and Michigan. I wanted to stay in the Midwest. And there was no bigger team for me than Michigan. And if I was going to go there, all I needed was Coach Moeller, who was our coach at the time, to just say, hey, we'd love you to come to play at Michigan, and we're going to offer you a scholarship. And he did, October 2, 1993. And it will always be one of the greatest days of my life, because so much of what I do now, obviously I'm still at Michigan, I'm still involved in football, but so much of who I am was determined by that decision, by going to Michigan and getting a chance to play for Mo and Lloyd and Mike DeBoard, my position coach, Terry Malone, Bobby Morrison. I was amongst great men, and I knew my parents were excited about it because, you raise a kid from the moment they're born until they're 18, and they go off to college, and you'll always be mom and dad to these kids, but now you send them off to college, and they're going to be influenced by a lot of things. And my parents have said it many times over the years. We were so glad and happy to send you to a group of men like they had at Michigan, because we were comfortable that they were going to, finish the work that we had started.
Yeah, and so John, coming out of high school, football, baseball, basketball, track. I mean, you just didn't play football, right? And at what 6'6", 305 is what you played at, right? So I mean that stature, to be able to do all those things is incredible. Now you hear Harbaugh talk about all the time, a multi-sport athlete. How much does that mean to you being a multi-sport athlete?
Oh, I think it's critical. I think that there are things that you learn as a basketball player that you only learn as a basketball player. And there are things you learn in each sport that are unique and specific to that sport. Now, if you take an athlete that has learned all those different things in terms of how they move and how they train and how they prepare for games, all of a sudden now you get an athlete that's a little bit different than some athletes that are just one sport players. And I'm not saying there's anything wrong with being a one sport player. I'm just a proponent of, hey, these kids are just that, they're kids, and sports are supposed to be fun. And I had the best times of my life were when I was playing basketball, baseball, football, track. It was because I was with my buddies. I was having a good time doing what I love to do. And if there's a coach that says, I only want you to focus on one sport and you only play for that one season, you're missing out on so much fun. And the lessons that you learn, not just about how your body moves or about training, but competition. You put yourself in a competitive environment as much as possible, then you learn how to win. You learn how to win. You learn how to handle losses. You learn how to recover. You learn how to come back when you've been down. All of those things that you learn during games and in training for different sports can translate into when you do pick a sport and you go play at college. Those are lessons that are invaluable.
So, John, we know that, of course, you did pick a sport, you did go to football, and you reached the pinnacle of success in the 97 team. And I've heard you say before that team truly loved one another. You guys played for the guy that was lined up next to you. So if we know that's, why you guys won a national title, can you just talk a little bit about how you guys got to that stage? Because I feel like so many teams don't even get a chance to reach that level of brotherhood.
Well, we had spent at Michigan a couple of years. My first few years, we were 8-4, and when you go to a school like Michigan, and you get to be a junior or senior, you start thinking about what's your legacy going to be when you leave. And we didn't want it to be of a bunch of 8-4 seasons where, we started out 5-0, and we always faltered towards the end of the year. We had taken some lessons that we had learned over the losses that we had and talked about them. All right, we would spend time in the off season in winter and summer conditioning, talking about why we lost those games. And it was never because we got beat by another team. It was because we had either lost focus or we didn't show up prepared or it was something that we did. And we said in 97, we want to make sure that we show up for every game and we give ourselves the best chance to win. And it's a sacrifice. And I talk to these guys about it all the time. There are certain sacrifices that you have to make to achieve certain goals. And after a game, after a big win, the thought is, let's go out and celebrate. Well, you know what? When you celebrate and, if you're 21 and you go out and have a couple of beers, that affects how you train the next day. And we said we were going to make the sacrifice. We were going to go out and celebrate, but we weren't going to overindulge. We weren't going to indulge at all because that was a sacrifice that we made for 5 months. But for the rest of our lives, we get to talk about what it meant to win a national championship. There's only been one national championship at Michigan in the last 70 years, and that's ours. And that's a memory, and that's something that the fans don't ever forget. It's something that we as a team have never forgot, and I think it's that group sacrifice that also brought us that much closer together.
Very cool. And I don't mean to skip over the draft in your first few years in the league, but when I look at your career, I think it's year 5. You ultimately, in the first preseason game, you tear your Achilles, which is an injury that can just end a career outright. So I just wanted to ask you just a little bit about your mindset, recovering from that, going through the whole rehab process, and ultimately getting yourself back to a level where you can play again.
Well, the hardest thing about being hurt as a player, and I had never been hurt up to that point. I mean, you may break a finger or break a hand, but they're all things that you can play through. You tear an Achilles and your season's done. There's no hope that you're going to play that year. So for me, it was, when you're in recovery, you're not around the guys as much as you would be. When guys are in meetings or they're out on the field, let's face it, we're all athletes. We love to have a good time. Funny stuff happens, and you're not in, the inside jokes. And those guys come in from the practice field and they're talking about something, and you just always feel like an outsider. No matter how much you're around, you're not in that group anymore. And I think that's probably the hardest thing to deal with because it's just something that you've never been used to. The recovery of the injury, and spending time in the training room, in the weight room, and making sure you give yourself a chance to get back to playing on the field. Honestly, that was the easy part because, one, I was a professional athlete. I was paid to do it. But you have this drive that says, this is not how I'm going to go out. I want to go out, on my terms. And there are so few people that have that opportunity to go out on their terms. And and still I didn't, at the end of my career, didn't go out on my terms because, you get released and nobody signs you. You still want to play. But, I had a great run. And from that moment on, I really got a chance to appreciate even more the privilege that I had of playing at Michigan, of getting the opportunity to play in the NFL and play football for as long as I did. It's some of these guys now think that it's their right and they deserve that. It's not. It's a privilege, and you got to take advantage of every moment that you have on the field because it's someday, you're going to want to play. And nobody's gonna ask you to. You're that kid that's left on the last to be picked, and that's never a fun feeling.
Yeah, I can imagine. But a couple of things you just said there about appreciating the opportunity, and there's injuries that you can play through. Well, you rebound from the Achilles to have your only All-Pro season in the NFL the following year. So you didn't just come back to the level you were at before. You would now hit a new high. And for those of you that don't understand, John's nickname is Rock. He's the epitome of toughness. You went through that 05 campaign with 2 broken thumbs. You were an All-Pro with 2 casts on your hands. So no one can say anything about playing through injuries like you can. So, the fact that you came back to the level that you did, is more than a testament to what it sort of takes to get back on top, battling back from an injury. Well, certainly being able to play through them.
Yeah, it was that. It was a tough year, and when you have injuries that are just that, they're injuries. You're not hurt. You're not going to be out. There's a certain part in your mind that you've got to go to and say, you know what? Even though this hurts, I can still help my team win. And the benefit of having my hands casted was I knew I was never going to be called for holding. So. It was they basically gave me 2 weapons. I got a chance to numb up my hands. They put casts on them, and they just gave me two clubs to use.
That's awesome,
John. That's great. So I just want to go more to the coaching part. So you played under Turner, Schottenheimer, Spurrier, Gibbs, Zorn. What was it like playing for all those coaches all those years, learning new schemes, but ultimately the personalities of the coaches too? What was that like going through that process of a new coach as the years went on?
Well, quite honestly, as a player, it sucked.
Yeah.
And you always have a new offense. You have new terminology. And your plays are generally pretty much the same, but now you've got to assimilate this new playbook into the terminology and what you're calling something into something different. So at the time, it wasn't a great situation to be in, always turning over head coaches. But one thing I did learn was a lot of different ways to coach, a lot of different ways that you can run a zone block, run a gap block. And, there's always these little intricacies. And then by the time you get to, year 8, 9, 10 of your NFL career, you can incorporate a lot of those things to make you a better player. And I use a lot of those things that I learned over those 10 years that I was with the Redskins now as a broadcaster, because I was exposed to so many different offenses, and we had the West Coast offense, we had a pro style offense, we had all these different things that really allow me now to look back on that experience and use that in my broadcasting.
Yeah, and that's something we always preach here at vIQtory too. When we're teaching the sport of football, there's no one cookie cutter way to learn football, right? And I think kids at a younger age think, oh, my coach taught me this, that's it. And I think it's easier to learn football when you have that open mind. And especially for you, I'm sure you had to have an open mind, because a coach may call this call when this happens, but the next year, new coach, it means something else.
Yeah, it does. And when you have that open mind, and when I first got in the NFL, I thought, well, this is what I did at Michigan, so it's going to work here. And I think a lot of the players as rookies or even second-year players struggle with the idea of trying new things. And at the NFL level, especially if you had, and I was very lucky to have, especially early in my career, good offensive line coaches. Russ Grimm was my line coach for my first 2 years. Joe Pendry was my line coach when we had Marty Schottenheimer as our head coach. And they would tell me, hey, as long as you're getting the job done, I'm good with it. The moment that you stop is when I'm going to ask you to change something. But they would also say, this is working, that's great, but why don't you try this? And it was a different technique, and they would allow me in practice to try the new technique. And if I got beat, they weren't jumping down my throat saying, you're not going to play if you can't make this block, or you're not going to play on Sunday if you don't perform better. They allowed me the opportunity to try new things so that on Sunday I was better. And if you got a good coach that allows you, exposes you to new ideas and says, hey, try this, and then modifies it as it's going and doesn't, use it against you. That's something I think is an absolute must especially for young coaches.
Yeah, and I'm sure that played right into your strengths too, keeping that flexibility where, I'm not comfortable doing this situation. I did this maybe 2 coaches ago, and I played a lot more comfortable this way. Could I try this coach? And for them to be open-minded like that and let you do your thing is probably why you had a lengthy career.
Yeah, and let's face it, when it comes down to it in the NFL, that you either get the job done or you don't on Sundays. Yep. And if you don't, they find somebody else.
Yep. So, John, you mentioned earlier Russ Grimm. I want to talk a little bit about the Hogs and what has started in the late 70s, 80s with the linemen, Russ Grimm, Mark Schlereth, those guys. Coming into the Redskins, was that the Hog mindset still around there when you got there, as far as that tough, gritty, put you on your back mindset of the linemen that the Hogs had with the Redskins? Absolutely.
And that's one of the things I loved about going to Washington was, there's not a lot of great traditions in the NFL because of free agency and all this stuff. But the Redskins, Washington, they had their own marching band. They had their own, fan club, and they had a great tradition. And one of the great traditions they had was for the offensive line. And, coming from Michigan, where we as well had a great tradition of offensive line, going there, it felt a little bit like college game day still when we played on Sundays, because you could look up and see the band playing and there were cheers. And to me, that's what, the whole football experience is about, is having those traditions. And, having Russ be my first line coach. And I think it's one of the funny things is, when the Hogs were labeled the Hogs because they were the biggest O-line, I think Russ told me that the heaviest he ever played at was like 275 or 280. And so that just shows you the different eras of football. And when people start comparing, Russ to Jake Long or to a different player and trying to come up with who was the greatest ever, it's almost impossible because the eras of football are so different.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, they've grown. I mean, essentially look back 30, 40 years ago, guys have gotten much bigger. The timeline of the offensive linemen, which we're putting out a post in a few weeks about that too, about how you look back in the 1940s, 1950s, the linemen weren't as big as they are now today. And, what do you think that has a lot to do with? Is it just the natural evolution of the position growing, or is it, is it more of the way kids are training nowadays? Or
well, I think it everything starts with money.
Yeah.
And, you look back to when Russ and those guys were playing, that was their second job. They didn't get paid enough to live year round just by playing football early on in their career. So they had jobs in the off season. And now all of a sudden, when the salaries get to a point where, okay, yeah, this is a professional athlete, that's all he does. Now in the off season, you start training instead of going to a different job. You start, probably watching what you eat a little bit more, finding out what nutrition wise, how your body recovers. You get a chance to recover. And I think anymore, there's so much science behind, how kids train in high school, how they train in college, how they eat at those different levels, and how their bodies are developing, that it's just a natural evolution of, I wouldn't necessarily say the position, but of athletes, because of technology and the investments that people have made in those areas. Yeah,
technology is especially a big part in that, because you can measure essentially everything that goes into your body and comes out of your body. I mean, everything you can measure nowadays. It's pretty remarkable and pretty incredible. I want to talk a little bit about the O-line you play with. Some of the guys, Chris Samuels, and the guys that made you essentially a dominant offensive line. What do you think it was, as in your mind, as an offensive line that makes a good offensive line? Is it just hanging out together in the offseason, getting the scheme down, getting your steps down together? Is there one thing in particular that makes a good offensive line really shine in the NFL?
Well, I think for any position in the NFL, you've got to have great chemistry. But I think it is most important at the offensive line position, because you've got to have 5 guys doing the same thing all the time. If you got one guy that is a step behind or on a different page, then you can't be successful as an offensive line. Because if we've got a run play to the left and I'm the right tackle and I do something completely different, my guy makes a tackle, 2-3 yards in the backfield. But if you get everybody going and we used to call it elephants on a train, and if you get everybody going in one direction, chances are you're at least doing something right. Yeah. But if you got, and then it's about developing that chemistry and wanting things. We wanted to be. Chris and I talked about being the best tackle tandem in the NFL. We talked about, how many sacks we did. We didn't want to allow any sacks, but 7 over a season was going to be a good number, or whatever it was. And you set goals for yourself. And there's no group that Chris's success was dependent on my success. Corey Raymer or Casey Robach, our centers. Our Chris and I's success were directly related to their ability to communicate who the Mike linebacker was, where the blitzes are coming from, how we adjust protections, and all of those things are vital to becoming a good offensive line.
Yeah, absolutely,
definitely. So, John, as we get towards the last stage of your NFL career, you have the ability to come back home and play for the Detroit Lions. What did it mean to you to be able to play professionally at the end of your career back home?
Oh, it was awesome. I mean, it was something I wanted to do my whole career, whether it was, in free agency. I never really got to free agency. I'm very grateful to Dan Snyder for the way that he treated me and my family while I was in Washington, and not allowing me to get to free agency. But when I finally had the opportunity, and Detroit said, hey, well, let's see what we can do here. It was great, because I grew up 20 minutes from the stadium. I had my parents were able to come to all the games, my high school football coaches, my basketball coaches, my high school buddies, and even people I knew in Ann Arbor. I mean, Ford Field is only about 35, 40 minutes from here. So, I was able to get back to a couple of Michigan games on Saturdays, and that meant a lot to me as well. So to be able to play at home is a special feeling.
Yeah. Now, John, you mentioned your parents, they were both teachers, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So how much did they have an impact post-football life, as far as like just, what you wanted to do? Or did you always know you wanted to get into the announcing game? Steve had that gigantic list earlier in the show where he introduced you and all the things that you're doing in the media. How much did they have an impact of what you wanted to do later on after football life?
My parents have always had a heavy hand in everything that I've done throughout my life. They were the most amazing parents a kid could hope for, and quite honestly, they're the best grandparents that my kids could ever hope for. They always set an example of and neither of them knew anything about or much about football. They didn't know much about radio or TV or what I'm doing now. But what they instilled in me was the ability to work hard. to appreciate the value of a hard day's work, to appreciate the things that you have, and understand that it's good to set goals. It's good to reach for those goals and a different, all the different ways that you can achieve those. So when I was done playing, I will always remember conversations that I had with my parents of, hey, you're not just retired. There's going to be a next step, and what's that going to be? And for a few years, it was just being dad, and being home with my kids, and that's still a huge part of what I'm doing. But as the kids grow up and when school starts, they're off to school all day long. I sit there and twiddle my thumbs, and now I've got a great opportunity. And the beautiful thing about radio is for the last couple of years, a lot of the radio shows I did from home. With the beautiful internet that we have, it can sound like I'm sitting in Winston-Salem or Seattle or Detroit. It didn't matter, and so you can do a lot of what we do from the comfort of your own home.
Yep.
Definitely, as we're seeing here, or in your office, in your case.
Yeah.
So, John, just to bring this full circle, you do retire. You do now have the position that you have with University of Michigan. What's it like for you being so involved in the program that gave you everything in terms of a career? I mean, like I said, no one bleeds harder for Michigan than you. And no one has the Michigan swag that you do if you ever see John on the pre and post game with his jackets.
For me, it's this place. Sometimes, you wander around, or, when I was first retired, I worked for the Big Ten Network, and, there's just a certain place where, you get a sweet spot in your life. And every time I've been around Michigan football, whether it was in recruiting as a player, when I would come back, there's a great tradition here. It's always felt like home. And one of the beautiful things is, like, when I came back to work here now, and by the way, when anybody says, that I'm currently employed by the University of Michigan, it gets me really excited, because it's always been a dream of mine to, again, be back here. But, there are people that have been here for 30, 40 years, and I'm working with people that I worked with as a player. Dave Abloff, one of our associate ADs, was, fresh in '97, and he's a guy that I work on a daily basis with, in terms of communicating with the football players and getting guests on the show and talking about Michigan football. So there's relationships that I've had here for 20 or 25 years that have evolved over time, from student athlete to alumni to coworker. That is, it's a special feeling.
Very cool. And John, before we jump into the gauntlet, I have to ask, what's the outlook for Michigan this year? What's the final win record for them? I'm sure they're going to go undefeated, national title.
15-0. There's no question. It's a Big Ten championship. We go to Indianapolis, and we probably face Wisconsin. Then we go to the playoffs, and whoever shows up will be willing to beat. So I'm very excited about this football season, because we had a very young team the last couple of years, and we've got some fresh coaches. Ed Warner, we got a new offensive line coach, and he brings a lot of great experience to that group. Jim McElwain, former coach at Florida, is our receivers coach. Pep Hamilton, who was here last year, has NFL experience, and obviously Jim Harbaugh brings a certain excitement to the program. And then on defense, Don Brown. I'm sure you guys maybe saw a little bit of it, but I know a lot of our fans saw the Amazon Prime series, and they know what he means to this program and the coaches that we have on the defensive side of the ball. It really excites me, because we're a year older. We've got great competition at quarterback. The offensive line is coming along. We've got, we're really good at all the skilled positions. And our defense was, last year, I think they ended up ranked number 3. 2 years ago, we were ranked number 1. So we put all the pieces together, and we start off with a win against Notre Dame, and that's all we can ask for.
Well, I know that Coach Harbaugh doesn't like to talk about any particular quarterback, so that's why I'm going to refrain myself from asking about it. But all right, John.
I do.
Well, we'll wrap this up with the gauntlet as promised. So Hope you're ready. Got to hit you with a couple of hard questions. So tell me, what's most important, the number 1 O or the number 1 D?
Number 1 O. You got to score points, man. We mow them down.
That's right. Now, I learned that you were a little bit of an outdoorsman. So if you could only do one, is it going to be hunting or fishing?
Fishing, no question. It's easier to take my kids. I've taken them both,
Sure.
and they can talk in the boat, and it's not a big deal. They talk in the deer blind, and it sucks.
I can imagine. A shootout or a defensive battle?
Oh, defensive battle. Nobody. I want to be able to to get in there and hit somebody in the mouth, and I don't want any kind of offensive shootout, because that means we're throwing the ball over the place, and it's always more fun to run block than it is to pass block.
Should have known. Now, is there a coach or a team that, regardless of level, you wish that you would have had a chance to play for or play with?
Oh boy, when I watched the Hall of Fame inductions, I played obviously in the NFC East, and we played Philly all the time. And I think Brian Dawkins was an unbelievable football player. I thought he was a great leader. I would have loved to have had him as a teammate.
Very cool. Yeah, I love to crawl out to give a speech there. Yeah,
that was awesome. It's all Brian Dawkins. That's exactly. He took that stage like he played every game, with an intensity, with a focus, with a purpose. And again, that's why I would have loved to have had him as a teammate.
Yeah, of course. All right, so I'm pretty sure I know the answer to this, but I'll ask anyway. Spread offense or a power run offense?
Next,
okay.
Yeah, not even a competition. Let's put the ball in a running back's hands and tell him run right behind Jansen.
Also, heard that you're a little bit of a country music fan. So right now, give me your top 1, 2 handful of artists that you really like.
Oh boy, Eric Church would probably be number 1.
Love it.
And I've got to go, classic. I know that they one of them's dead, one of them's still playing, but Willie and Waylon, you can't beat it.
All right, and last but not least, what's most important, the players or the scheme?
Oh, the players. The players make all the difference. You can have the greatest scheme in the world, but if you don't have guys that can execute it, you don't have a group of players that know how to work hard, how to grit their teeth when things don't go well. You got nothing. So it's all about the players.
Awesome. Well, Jon, thank you so much for coming on with us. And again, In the Trenches podcast, the pre and post game for Michigan, anything Michigan related, Jon Jansen is your man. And Jon, just so we can put this out there as well, where can people follow you on social media?
My Twitter handle is at Jon Jansen 77. Same with Instagram. And hit me up with any questions. I love talking to fans. So this is, as you guys know, this is an interactive game. So and let's get ready for a great 2018 college football season.
We can't wait. So there you go. Hit Jon Jansen up with your questions. Thanks a lot, Jon.
No problem. Go Blue.